morning, everyone, and welcome to today's Clusters Talks. Today's theme is Launch, Grow, Lead, the EU Strategy for Startups and Scale-Ups. As we know, startups and scale-ups are absolutely vital to the innovation and competitiveness that we want to see in Europe. We heard last year about the Draghi reports and the Letta reports, all of which focused on how much more competitive we need to be, and startups are an intrinsic part of that. We're going to talk about what the European Commission is doing today, its new strategy that's going to try and create a better environment to allow startups to get from the point of innovation to that real scale-up point, sort of avoiding the so-called valley of death. So we're going to hear about that from the European Commission. Let's have a quick look at the agenda. We'll start, as usual, with the news from Nina, and then we'll go on to hear from DG Grow about the Startup and Scale-Up Strategy. That will be followed by a panel debate and wrapping up, as always, with the funding opportunities. As always, on our Clusters Talks, we want everyone to get involved. We are going to be using Slido to launch polls a little bit later on. You can scan the QR code to answer those, and we'll take those into account during our discussion. Also, please use the Q&A function to ask questions. They're both at the bottom of your screen. There's the chat function as well to your right, which we can use for comments or to share links or for feedback during the discussion. But if you have a really specific question for one of our panelists, do try and use that Q&A function as it pops up more quickly. If you would like to get involved in the discussion and you want to speak, please raise your hand. Again, the button is at the bottom of the screen, and we will get the team to switch you to a panelist and get you to switch on your camera and your microphone, and you can involve yourself in the discussion. Do note that the session is being recorded, so if you switch on your camera, you will be recorded, and the recording will be published on the European Cluster Collaboration Platform. So I think we've covered everything about the basic rules for today. They're the same as always, and we hope you're going to have a great session. But now I'm going to hand over to Nina Hoffman to tell us about the latest news from the European Cluster Collaboration Platform.
Many thanks, Jennifer, and good morning to everyone. Probably digital skills will be a topic of today as well. In that regard, the European Commission has published the 2025 State of the Digital Decade report, which reveals some uneven progress that we see for now in the EU's 2030 digital goals, where they highlight that only a little bit more than half of the Europeans possess basic digital skills, and that there's a shortage of advanced ICT experts, especially regarding cybersecurity and AI. So there's definitely some room for improvement here. If you want to read more about the report, the link is in the chat. The Commission is also seeking experts for an AI scientific panel. Here they want to establish a scientific panel of 60 independent experts to advise on the implementation of the AI Act. If you have a PhD or equivalent expertise in fields like AI risk or cybersecurity or compute thresholds, and are independent of any AI providers, you're most welcome to apply, or if you know anyone who would like to be involved in this panel, the application is open until the 14th of September. And the link is in the chat if you would like to learn more about it. And looking at events that we offer from the European Cluster Collaboration Platform, there are several matchmaking events happening in the fall. So you can join us, for example, in Dubai on the 1st until the 3rd of October. In the context of the WeTechs conference, we will have the matchmaking with clusters and businesses, especially from clean energy, water management, green mobility, smart cities, and agri-food. And up to 20 EU cluster representatives will be funded to go to do Dubai. The deadline for the first cutoff is the 25th, so today. And if there are any places remaining, there will be additional cutoffs. If you're more interested in going to India, this will happen on the 29th until the 31st of October. Key industries that will be discussed there are also renewables and clean energy and storage, smart grid and energy infrastructure, electric mobility, as well as green finance and investment support. This matchmaking is also open for clusters and for SMEs if they want to join us, join at their own expenses. And you will be going to the Renewable Energy India Expo as well. Great opportunity to learn more about this destination. And of course, doing the matchmaking there with the counterparts. Taiwan is happening on the 21st until the 23rd of October. So in Taipei, you will have the chance to go to the Taitronics in AIoT Taiwan Expo. And as you can already see from this focus, that the matchmaking will be mostly related to AI, robotics, but also sustainable energy, industrial IoT, semiconductors, and circular economy. Or alternatively, you also have the option to go to Vietnam, which will happen on the 4th until the 6th of November, visiting the Vietnam Industrial and Manufacturing Fair, and to discuss with the Vietnamese industry leaders and clusters for any collaborations in advanced manufacturing and industrial innovation. Then on the agenda, apart from the matchmakings, we also, of course, have the Clusters Meet Regions events. For the second day of the one in Italy is happening right now, as we have our webinar. The next one will take place in Cluj on the 1st and 2nd of July. And then we will also be in Slovenia, in Finland, and in Germany during September and November. So here we bring together clusters and policymakers and other cluster stakeholders to discuss how clusters can boost regional economy and what kind of role they can play for the green and the digital transition. So a lot of great networking opportunities, lots of events happening. So we invite you to register for the ones that you find most interesting. And with that, I hand over back to you so that we can get started.
Absolutely, Nina. Lots of matches due to be made in the next few months. So let's get back to the topic of today's discussion, which is the Startup and Scale-Up Strategy. As I mentioned at the beginning, why it's so important, but to tell us more about the nitty-gritty, I'm going to hand the floor over to Omar Inaji, who is the Legal and Policy Officer within DG Grow in the European Commission. Omar, please, I know you have slides and a great way to tell us what's happening, so over to you.
Thank you, Jennifer, and good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here to give a bit of a presentation this morning on the Startup and Scale-Up Strategy. I think we can switch already to the next slide again. Yeah, perfect. So the Startups and Scale-Up Strategy was adopted last month, 28th of May. It's basically, let's say that you have to see it as a package of, or it goes with other strategy. There has been the Savings and Investment Union strategy that was adopted earlier in March or April, if I'm not wrong. Then we had the Single Market strategy, and now we have the Startups and Scale-Ups. This strategy is basically trying to make Europe the best place for launching the business and also for growing. We have a lot of startups, but what we have seen is that a lot of them move abroad. So the strategy is really focusing on helping them to be created here and also helping them to stay here in Europe. We can go already to the next slide, please. So one of the, two key challenges that we have seen during the preparation of the strategy is double. The first one, there is a lack of financial investments at the pre-commercial stage for the startups. So when they are at the prototype moment, but there is also a huge gap at the scaling moment. So this is a bit of a picture that we have from the Europe financial investment framework. So we've basically tried to look at all of those phases and see how the strategy could help, or how from the Commission we should push for specific actions. Next slide, please. So when we have analyzed those various stages, we've seen that basically there are 5 main pillars of challenges that we have noticed and that we had to take into account. The first one, the obvious one, is the regulatory and bureaucratic burdens for startups and scale-ups. That goes from the very simple fact that there is still fragmentation in a lot of sectors in Europe, between member states on taxation, labor law, reporting requirement. Then there is also a problem of the regulatory approvals. In the various sectors, approvals come way too late in the process, or the process is way too slow. Then we have the access to infrastructure. So here we've seen that basically startups have difficulties to access centers for research or research partners, or to basically have the specific infrastructure or labs for their prototypes. Then the access to talent. Here it's double, and I've listened at the very beginning, we were talking about the skills. So we've seen that there is a lack of talented people or skilled people in Europe that are needed for the startups. So first of all, from the skills part, where we need basically to train them more, but also we need to attract the best talent also from outside of Europe. And that's where we've seen a few gaps as well. Then the access to market, that's also something that in a way it's shared with all the type of companies. It's not just for startups, but there are particular access to market problems that are specific to startups as such. For instance, the low participation in public procurement, or the lack of commercialization of research. And then there is also something that we have seen is, and I think is kind of like in line with all those events with matchmaking, there is a limited access or matchmaking between the startup community and big companies, basically. And finally, the other challenge that we've noticed and we've seen is the access to finance. That's what I've mentioned at the very beginning. Basically, we have an underdeveloped VC market in Europe, but also we have a patchwork of national measures that are all different on private investment, and all of these basically impact the need for finance of our startups. Next slide, please. On this basis, basically, we have built the strategy on those 5 pillars, and we have tried to provide actions on each one of them to kind of help or correct the issues that we've seen. The first one obviously is trying to give an innovative friendly regulation, providing a better finance, a fast market uptake for the solutions, support for best talents, and the access to infrastructures and networks and services. Those are the 5 pillars of the strategy. So when you check the strategy in itself, you will see that it is built according to this. And finally, we have also provided few action to basically monitor the success of the strategy, but also to see how our ecosystem of startups is evolving during the years. Next slide. I'm not going to go in full details of all the actions because there are roughly 26 of them in the strategy, but maybe to give you a few of them that for each of the pillars. In the innovation-friendly regulation, I mean, there is the question of the 20th regime that has been announced at the very beginning of this year. This is obviously a big project, a legislative project that the Commission is carrying on, and that should be, the proposal should be adopted by next year, Q1. There we are still in the making, but obviously the idea is to provide one set of rules, of company law rules in Europe, and where the company will basically be recognized in all member states without any issue, because the form will exist here at national level. Then we have the business wallet. The Innovation Act, same as the 28th regime, will be beginning of 2026. And there is specific innovation legislation where we try to provide, for instance, rules on sandboxing. Then we have many other legislation at that level, but it's basically here the idea of providing the legislative framework for our companies and for our startups to thrive in Europe, and to also ensure having access to the single market. Next slide, please. Then, as I said at the very beginning, we have a huge problem of capitals in a way in Europe and the VC market that is underdeveloped. There are various actions that will try to kind of work the way through here. But one of the important one is, for instance, the Scaleup Europe Fund. So we will be providing under the current MFF a new fund that will be focusing for the scale-ups mainly, or just for the scale-ups, and in specific sector that will be determined. This fund will be privately managed as well, and will not be just public fund. It will be a shared of funds at that level, with public and private. We do not have yet the numbers. The strategy was adopted, as I said, like a month ago. So now we are in the implementation phase, and we'll try to give you any of those answers at a later moment. We will also provide an European corporate network, this to create the link as well for between startups and companies. We will also have a look at how we can use IP as valuation or as collateral. This is something that we will also carry on. And there will be other measures just to basically bring or bridge this gap of finance that we have in Europe. Next slide, please. So then for the market access and expansion, we will be also looking at various initiatives here. What we call the Lab to Unicorn initiative. It's basically creating at each stage tools for the startups, basically, where they can, from the prototype to the form of unicorn. So we will be putting in place hubs. Those hubs will have to be connected or interlinked as well with the current hubs that already exist, for instance, the EN. We will also be looking for the blueprint for licensing and looking at the rules on state aids. And finally, obviously, we will have a look at the procurement measures. As you know, there is a revision coming up next year on public procurement. So we will be looking at how to ensure that public procurement rules in Europe are adapted also for innovation. Next slide, please. Then, as I said, we need to bring the talents in Europe and also need to help them, those that we have here, basically. So we will have the Blue Carpet Initiative. It's a full list of initiatives, but just what you have to basically keep in mind is that it will look at the blue card, the visa strategy. So how do we help bring those talents in Europe, and how do we facilitate that? We will also have the Fair Labor Mobility Package that will come at the beginning of next year, or next year in any event. That will also look at the labor law in Europe as such. Then next slide. Then access to infrastructure. Here is how do we connect research and the startups. So it will try, the few initiatives here will try to bridge those elements. As I said, there will be also the Innovation Act at the beginning of next year, where there will probably be some elements trying to kind of create these interlinkages and allow the access to those infrastructures. And then next slide. And then, as I said, the final ones are basically to overlook and to assess the evolution of the ecosystem in Europe, to have a dedicated survey, a scoreboard, and then we will be looking at also in the context of the definition of startup, scale-ups, innovative companies. So all of this is work ongoing. Where we are now, so as you know, or maybe not, the Commission has put in place a task force that was tasked to provide or prepare this strategy. Now we are looking at the implementation and try to prepare basically the various actions that needs to be implemented in the next months. So most of the action are for 2026. There is maybe one for 2027. So it's going to be quite fast at that level. I think that's it from my side. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Omar. Yeah, that's quite in detail. And I see people looking to get the slides afterwards so they can go through those in a bit more timely way themselves. But of course, there's also a lot of information on the Commission website, we should say. There's fact sheets there, there's Q&A sheets for you to find out a bit more. We'll turn now to our Slido questions. So this is our chance to ask you questions. You can scan that QR code with your smartphone, or you can go directly to slido.com in your browser and put in the code STARTUPS to take you to our first question today, which is, which challenge do you think most hinders startups and scale-ups in the EU today? That's a multiple choice question. So you've got options of lack of funding, business know-how, complex regulations, talent shortages, limited access to infrastructure, or other. And I know you can specify in the chat what that other might be, and I'm sure there'll be quite a few things there. Obviously, this is by way of looking at some of those solutions that are going to be put forward in the Startup and Scale-up strategy. So complex regulations and lack of funding, absolutely the things that people are most concerned about. I think in some ways that's a rather evergreen response. Business know-how, a few more people starting to vote for that. I won't mention the other because I'm going to have to keep an eye on the chat to see what that might be. Lack of funding and complex regulations, still most people considering that. Talent shortages are also an issue. Limited access to infrastructure, no one is voting for that yet. But perhaps we'll give you another minute or two because I see so far 17 people have voted. But we have many more joining us today. So let's see. A few more moments. So I think very clearly that coming out on top there, it's a lack of funding, then the complex regulations, business know-how, and talent shortages last in the list of options we've given you. But we will see whether people specify some other challenges that they think might be there. So next question is, which actions could help to accelerate startup growth in the EU? We will let you write your answers in there and see what you think, which actions could help to accelerate startup growth in the EU. I'm going to guess that possibly one of them will be more funding, considering lack of funding was one of the issues. A unified regulatory framework, again, I guess that's in response to seeing overly complex regulation as a problem. More VC funding in particular, something that we maybe struggle a little bit with in Europe compared to the US. 5 people are typing, so we'll wait and see what their suggestions are. And we still have the QR code on the screen for those who have not yet connected. Just scan that with your phone and it will take you directly there, and you can be anonymous and log in without actually having to go through a long process. Innovation hubs, incentives for big industry to connect with startups, something I think that is already part of the strategy. Combining of business knowledge, funding, and networking, again, something we clusters love to talk about. Better and more experienced startups, scale-up mentoring, so non-funding or non-regulatory measures there. Innovation-friendly regulation, again, to now new business models. I guess we see the AI Act as possibly in that. Clear demand from the start of the project, so having a view to scale up even from innovation stage. Support from experts and professionals in funding, financing, and business growth. I guess that feeds back into the mentoring as well. Funding, helping to get access to the market, possibilities to be present at trade shows in the sector. Again, something that can be helped via clusters. Simplified legislation, again, I'm not surprised to see this coming up again and again, considering that complex regulation is seen as a challenge. Reverse pitching to large companies, possibly something you need help for a mentor to help you do. Creation of visibility for startups and the problems addressed. Defining the role of ESOs. Just do it mentality. I think very famously a sports brand language there. So possibly coming from the US, this just do it mentality is something we hear again and again, that maybe Europe needs to be a little more American and the Americans need to be a little bit more European if we want optimal competitiveness. Testing beds in industrial enterprises, cities, infrastructure, etc. And one participant, and we've got, that's the lot. That is a lot of different suggestions. I'm not going to try and annotate which ones we're going to talk about on our panel next, but I hope our panelists are listening so that we can dive into some of these suggestions. Access to a business network as well. finally, we're to our third question. What specific support could help your cluster or organization better engage with startups and scale-ups? So we've had a lot of suggestions for which sort of actions could accelerate growth across EU level, but what specific support would help you? For those of us joining today, what do they want to see? State aid regulation. I presume that means slightly revised state aid regulation. Cluster training. I think that's something that we shall talk about after this event. Any others, people? Any suggestions? I think we've got a couple more typing. We have 4 more people with suggestions. So what would help your cluster or organization better engage with the startups and scale-ups? And I know there's lots of ideas now starting to flow in. Access to investors, that's an evergreen statement here as well. Create an EU VC funding initiative, simplification of regulation, and the opportunity to support pilot cases. Long-term funding for staff, I think that's probably a really good one there to talk about long-term. Better understanding of the funding opportunities available. Public funding for programs. So I'm seeing funding in 5 of those. Awareness of the existence of regional startup support. We know that regionals and all these things need to be very place specific as well. Thank you very much for that. I hope that is going to whet the appetite for putting questions to our panelists. And we're going to turn now to our panel discussion. And we have joining us Catalina Luca, Management Consultant from Imago Mall, Gisela Sanchez, who is Head of European Affairs at Finance Innovation, Johnny Ostvin is Program Manager at Agri-Food Capital, Jose Villa Gonzalez is Head of Service at Ivasimas One Enterprise Europe Network, and Stami Kritas is Cluster Manager for HBio and Managing Director of SEBA. If you could all switch your cameras on, we can see your lovely faces and start. Let me begin, Catalina, with you. Just give me your opening thoughts on what you see as the issues around the need for more support for startups and scale-ups.
Hi, everyone. Nice to be here today and discuss about startups and scale-ups. As the Omar already presented, the regulatory problems is the most big problem in this time into Europe. We have the fragmentations that it's very difficult for a startup to deal with it in every single country. We have different types of approvals. The access to market is very hard, and the access to finance also. But me, for example, I'm coming from innovation in medical imaging and health tech sector. So from my point of view, we have different problems regarding the sectors in which we are coming from as a startup. Because, okay, we want to have a good frame for the regulations, but it shouldn't be like the same regulations for all kinds of startups if we don't take into account the sector in which they are coming from.
Thank you. No one size fits all, I think, is what we would say there. Gisela, same question to you. Just set out your initial thoughts on what are the challenges in this area and what we can do.
Yes, thank you, Jennifer. Yeah, I think well, the initiative is good. We also see a lot of I come from a digital financial cluster in France, and we can see that regulatory frame could be complex to handle for fintechs in our sector. But I completely agree with Catalina. Specific sectors have their own issues, and we need to try to help them go through. So yeah, we cannot sometimes adapt to everyone, I know, but yeah, it will be better if we try to. And talent is something also that we see as a big issue, even though, like, for instance, in France, it's have a huge pool, but still, we discuss a lot with entrepreneurs that have had to work recruiting the best profile, and sometimes they need to just look for that other way. And yes, access to building the bridges with the private financing is something we work a lot within our organization. But yeah, of course, it's not the easiest part, but it's something that we completely understand we need to do for our members.
Great. Johnny, coming to you, your initial thoughts, and perhaps even if you want a reaction to some of those Slido comments that people put in.
Yeah, I'm very happy with this with this strategy, and also good to see all these reactions and people engaging in this webinar. I think there are quite some challenges that we need to tackle in the EU. Yeah, in the EU, but also on a national, country level, and then regional level as well. And one of the challenges that I see is a good support in terms of experienced startup and scale-up entrepreneurs that can help other entrepreneurs that are working on their startup. Because what I see is that often first-time founders, they make a lot of mistakes, which is very costly and time-consuming. And I think it's a fairly quick win to help them with mentoring and guidance there. So that is just on the startup level. And I think also if we look at, for example, the EU versus the US, is that the US has a very united and thriving startup ecosystem. And yeah, we have the problem that it is very, very scattered in the EU. So we cannot make that synergy, the 1 + 1 = 3 effect that the US has. And it's easy said, but it's very difficult to tackle that.
Yeah, I think it's something we'll come back to again and again in these conversations. Jose, same question to you. I mean, we got really quite a lot of responses to those Slido questions, more than we often do. So we've obviously struck a chord here. What are your thoughts initially?
Yeah, my thoughts is I'm very happy with the new strategy, which is something very powerful and we very much needed. But I think that the strategy itself lacks of something, is missing out something very important, because I think that there are many, it's very focused on deep tech maybe. And I have the feeling that it's very focused on this initiative of deep tech. And I especially heard that part about talking about the from lab to unicorn, something like this, for example. But I think that it should be more inclusive with the startups that are not so deep tech, but they have scalable business models and are ready to growth. And there are startups, there are interesting examples of startups and scale-ups that are not so much deep tech, but they are growing fast. And I'm talking about fintechs, for example. I'm talking about platform-based businesses that are truly based on scalability, on wise business models. And these companies really are executing very well because technology itself is not everything, you know. Deep tech is not the key to everything, because deep tech without a scalable business model of an execution team, a skill team with execution capabilities, it's 75% of the success. So in my opinion, deep tech is not the key thing, and also on at cluster level support. And I think the clusters initiatives across the EU should be more integrated across with other networks of support that there are in the EU. I think the startups need a single entry point to access all this wealth of tools and initiatives I'm talking about of the Enterprise Europe Network. I am working deeply in the Enterprise Europe Network. I know also the cluster collaboration platform. And I think more deeper collaboration between EU support structures should be also very interesting thing for both startups and scale and also for these initiatives themselves.
Well, thank you. And Stami, your initial thoughts as well as any reaction you had to the attendees' thoughts that they put in online.
I think in general, I agree. We're all on the same page. I have to say that I'm coming from the life sciences, the biotech space. So obviously regulation, Catalina mentioned it, is very complex and takes a lot of time. I do agree that probably, that the strategy is very good. Now we have to implement it. So this is the $1 million question, how we can implement it, how we can make it successful, and how we can actually measure the KPIs at the end and say, okay, this has been successful. At a cluster level, we across Europe, especially in life sciences, we support scale-ups of startups, and that's the harder bit. But I think probably we have to start thinking from the initial, when we first submit for an ESG Pathfinder or a startup is actually presenting to a VC, we have to obviously always put into perspective the scalability part, because you can have a lot of great excellence, a lot of great research that is coming out of Europe. We know that we're doing tech transfer in a limited way, but we always have to have in mind how scalable it is and how we can actually do that in Europe. So then we don't see the brain drain that we've been seeing in the past years, going to the US mainly, but now extending across the globe.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah.
Go ahead, Johnny.
No, Stami, I fully agree. And what I'm also, I'm very interested to know and to see how this strategy, what you said, Stami, like the implementation. So how do we go from strategy on the high level, policymaker level, and how does that, drip down to us in the regions? And that is, I'm very curious to see how that will work, because I would, I see a lot of good things there, and I'm like, yeah, I can use that, I can use that, I can use that. So I'm like, okay, how does that then, drip down to the regions?
Yeah, I mean, the devil is always in the detail with these things, especially when it comes to implementation on the ground. Talking a little bit concretely, let me stay with your organizations, Gisela, and ask, what are the concrete initiatives or activities that you're doing to support startups and scale-ups, and maybe tie that into how that might work with an overarching sort of quite high-level strategy?
Yes, well, I can think about we actually have founders club, Scale-up Club. In the one we try to gather all the CEO founders and co-founders of scale-ups that we have within our organization that have raised above a certain amount. So they can discuss about, it's only CEOs participate, gathering together because they have specific issues that sometimes they don't have, or they don't have people to share with. So they just open up and share best practices among them. So this is one of the things that we try to do. And also we have, this is a European Commission project, and the one we are involved. This is a Women Tech EU that we support, and this is the startup part because we support financially. It's a cascade funding program, female entrepreneurship on deep tech in Europe. So we'll be funding 160 female entrepreneurs on early stage startups.
Well, I'm going to actually ask the same question to all of you, Caroline or Catalina. Sorry, what is your concrete action that you're taking on the ground?
Yes, we in Imago Mall cluster, we lead in initiatives focused on fostering innovation in the medical imaging and health tech sectors. Our works involve supporting startups and scale-ups through cross-sector collaboration, access to validation infrastructure through our cluster members, and integration into national and European innovation network. We have some projects. We are partners in European projects. But now we are partners in a big project called Innovate EU, which is formally titled Strengthening European Startups Through Interconnected and Inclusive Innovation Ecosystem, which is funded by Horizon Europe. We are 8 partners from 5 countries, from emerging countries and so on, that we are trying to build an ecosystem. So we as a cluster, we are trying to build an innovation ecosystem, to be a builder for the startups.
Jose, let me ask you to come in there with your thoughts. You're on mute.
Yeah, sorry. I'm working in an innovation agency, a regional innovation agency, and we have our own Scaleup program. You know, this Scaleup program is up and running for 7 years, and is linked also with support of our regional clusters. We cooperate with clusters in order to identify those companies already scaling, but they need to improve the scalability. They need to improve their business models, and they also improve their outstanding execution, because sometimes we miss out execution, but execution is a key thing. So we equip them with soft skills, with training, with mentoring on a lot of topics. And on top of that, we also make use of the Enterprise Europe Network, because this program is also linked to the Enterprise Europe Network. I am working, I'm really involved in this European network as the chair of the thematic group for startups and scale-ups. And I try to coordinate activities with other scale-up programs across Europe. So we organize events between several partners, regional partners across Europe, in order to put together our companies that are alumni, let's say, of our scale-up programs, in order to cooperate with them and to find synergies and try to develop interesting activities for them.
Thank you. Stami, again, same question to you, and also your experience across your what you're working on, because you wear several different hats.
That's right. So I've got 2 hats. So I'm a cluster manager of a biotech and life sciences cluster here in Greece, the Hellenic Biocluster, and then I'm managing a network, CBER, the Council of European Bioregions, which is a network of 50 life sciences clusters across Europe. So across innovation ecosystems, across countries, with limitations and opportunities. And so some of the things that we have done as HBio is that we have tried to actually use the big pharma industry that Greece has traditionally into engaging them to get to know our startups in order to actually make them work together. So what the strategy is now proposing, we've done it a few years ago. We have actually asked, for example, I can name them because this is public knowledge, AbbVie, multi-big pharma industry in Greece, to actually connect, do innovation scouting for them, actually present some of our startups in order for them to co-develop and work together. So that has worked really well, that model. And that has actually led to the organization of a scale-up lab between AbbVie and HBio for smaller partners here in Greece. In other ways that we have done it is we've done business missions which are specific in order to actually go and connect ecosystems, as Catalina said, and as most clusters here, we work in consortia with other clusters, so we get to know our partners well. I think that's the strength and the value that a cluster can bring into the strategy and into the ecosystem in whole, is that we know our partners and we know all the players and the major stakeholders in the ecosystem, so we can easily match and connect to the equivalent when it comes to Romania. We worked with Catalina before, to Belgium, to Spain, in order to actually bring the right people to discuss, not just for them to do B2B business and connect, but in order to actually share policy, in order to, because I think Johnny made a very valid point, you know, make sure that all the regions are at the same level. If we're talking about single market, this is something that we have been to discuss. And of course, we're using initiatives such as the Euroclusters call, when we have clusters working together in specific topics. Those were announced yesterday. We had an excellent proposal of trying to bring our startups the TRL level and the business readiness level that I think somebody mentioned into the same par, because this is something that will help them to scale up. Unfortunately, it wasn't funded, but we're still going to do it anyway. And collaborating into projects like the I3 framework, because that's important. You bring stakeholders, smaller partners, regions with national policies together. So that's important in order to do that. And of course, utilizing the tools that the Commission has, like the EAC, the EAC Accelerator, the pre-acceleration now through the WIDERA countries. These are tools that the clusters can actually implement and help our members or our startups to grow. And as CBER, because we are a network, we are doing a little bit of more policy work. So when we're talking to the Commission in the new funding tools or the new strategies, we are there to actually bring the voice of the clusters and the 1,500 stakeholders, the 15,000 stakeholders that the CBER network has. So these kind of forums of discussing, and I think Catalina mentioned the cross-sector, that's important as well. Because as Jose said, you want to bring people together, you want to build these networks, they have to be cross-sectoral in order to actually promote growth at a bigger sort of European level.
I'm not surprised people wanted to pick your brains on the big pharma startup collaboration, because that was certainly something that came up that a lot of people, a lot of attendees anyway today, this morning, are interested in that link between the two. Johnny, coming back to you, feel free to give us some concrete actions that you're working on as well. But I'd like to know what you think are the most critical barriers from entrepreneurs. You mentioned at the outset that you see entrepreneurs or startups making mistakes that others have made before them, and perhaps that's some low-hanging fruit we could grab there. Is it that they're making the same mistakes over and over, or is it that the system is designed to funnel them into these kind of these cul-de-sacs that are maybe avoidable if they had the advanced knowledge from other practitioners?
Yeah, it depends. It depends whether you look at which stage the startups are in. So I mean, we're talking about startups and scale-ups, which is very broad. So I'm also very glad that, and one of the points that Omar mentioned is that we need clear definition about startups and scale-ups, because we talk about it, but everybody is thinking about something differently. But if I look at very early stage startups, so if I look at, for example, university students, the common mistake they make there is that they always come with a solution before knowing the exact problem. And if they work on that, they think about a product, a solution, they think about features that they can add, especially technical founders. And I think it's very good to put a founder, an experienced founder, and have them talk to these early stage founders about, okay, make sure that you really understand the problem that you're trying to solve before doing anything else. And I think with later stage startups, when they are getting into the scale-up phase, it's a totally different type of skill set you need than when you're early stage. You need to scale, you need to think about HR, about sales, about processes, putting all these things in place. So it's really about more like management. And there you also need different type of mentors and advice in order for them to get to the next level. And all that knowledge is available, but somehow it's still difficult for a startup to and for scale-ups to tap into that. And you see a lot of painful mistakes that they make, and I see a lot of startups and scale-ups, they fail not because the team is not good, but they just make avoidable mistakes.
Yeah, and then just as a follow-up, I mean, do you think that clusters can create this sort of system to help? I mean, is that the right level? I mean, and we've also, as I say, got this new EU level. It seems a little bit, if you like, remote from those university students. But are you optimistic that the right systems will help?
Yeah, well, I think, for example, if a scale-up wants to go into a different market, so I'm from the Netherlands, and if a scale-up wants to go into, let's say, Greece or Romania, which is a completely different market, it would be very beneficial to get then experienced entrepreneurs telling them, okay, this is how it's done in Romania or in Greece or in France or in Spain, or these are the organizations that you can, knock on the door for support. So if there, for example, if there would be a common pool of startup mentors, scale-up mentors, domain experts that you can tap into, and that there's like a common pool of these people across the EU. So if I want to, I'm ready to scale, and I want to, Netherlands, we're a super small country. So for a startup, the next step is always to go abroad. So where do I find those people? And they're there, of course.
Yeah, I mean, I want to try and make this link between the EU level strategy and the startups, because there's a lot of work to be done in going from one to the other. But after all, that is the ultimate aim. Catalina, from your perspective, I mean, how can clusters help create this innovation-friendly ecosystem, and how can they bring together, if you like, these two, quite far apart, ideologies or backgrounds or ecosystems?
As I already said, the mission of the cluster is an ecosystem builder. This is the cluster role. I have also multiple hats. So I am a university lecturer, biomedical engineer faculty. And in this case, regarding what Johnny says, I try to bridge academic knowledge with practical innovation. I mentor students, promote entrepreneurial mindset, integrate real-world startups methodologies to higher education. I try to do this to a micro level. And my other hat is that I'm a biomedical startup founder, and I had a lot of problems to struggle with. My main problem is that in medical tech, in medical innovation, pharma innovation, the ideas are coming from the university. We don't have a framework of how a startup will exit from the university. At least in Romania, we don't have this. And we are struggling, we are obtaining IPs, we are establishing TRL levels and so on. But when it comes to funding, our prior is to access public funding, because if we are trying to access private funding, I was into this position, at least into the medtech sectors, it's going to last until the VC is going to gain something from this. And in my case, I got a lot of offers from the United States, for example. More easy to them to go with the medical device over there. Or I got an offer from a local VC founder, and he told me, okay, your dream is to make it a medical device, but let's start with a simple device that we can find it into the supermarket.
Yeah, well, certainly in the med tech area, there is quite a long approval process, which I know creates this kind of, if you like, disincentive for investment at the early stage, because you don't know how long it's going to take before you've got a product ready for market. Gisela, same sort of question to you in terms of how clusters can help entrepreneurs overcome those critical barriers, and what you see those critical barriers as being.
I can say that creating bridges between also the clusters, what we're doing actually now, is very useful when we want to help also entrepreneurships. It's true that France, it's a big market already for them, but we see more and more that they really want to go elsewhere in Europe or international. 70% of the scale-ups that we work, that are in France, are already in other countries, or want to do it in the next 12 months. And for us, it's very important creating these bridges. And Johnny was saying, giving the right people to knock at the door when they're trying to build another company or so in another country. And for that, we have been working in some ideas. We're trying to map in actually on the fintech part, some actors in at least part of the countries that we have started with, so they can at least have like a list of the people, whether they're investors, accelerators, incubators, trainers, or everything. So at least they can start with that. So I think that's an important thing to help them with.
Johnny, I'm going to come back to you for a quick final question because I know you need to leave us very shortly. And we haven't touched on funding yet in this panel discussion. And I see a question in the Q&A asking whether you think the Commission is better suited in funding scale-ups via a half publicly funded startup fund than private money. Just give us your general thoughts on what's the issue with funding and where should it come from in a nutshell.
Yeah, I think also that depends really on the stage of the startups. So I think early stage startups, pre-revenue startups, the VCs are not interested in that because it's too risky. So I think there, the EU should, or the local governments or the national governments should see how they can help those startups to pull them through the valley of death, the first valley of death, as we saw in Omar's presentation. So I think that's probably something for the governments to step into. And if I look at scale-up funding, then I also see it's a big difference with the US as well, is that if for example, like a biopharma or a deep tech startup, it is okay to get 10 million, 20 million, but if we're talking about tickets of like 100 million and more, it's really, really difficult to get that in the EU. So I don't have the solution answer how to solve that, but that is something to address. And you see that that is something where the US is ahead of us.
Well, that's unfortunate, but I guess it's not just a zero-sum game where we're in total competition with the US. This is about creating a competitive European ecosystem generally. And I guess as well as the stage of the scale-up or startup, it's also about the sector they're in as well. Some sectors have longer lead times than others. Johnny, thank you very much for joining us. We will let you go, but we really appreciate your thoughts and expertise. Jose, let me come back to you because I wanted to let Johnny have a word before we lost him. To come back to my prior question, what do you see as the critical barriers for entrepreneurs and how are clusters best placed to help solve some of those problems that they face?
Yeah, okay. Well, Johnny mentioned something very interesting and resonates with me, is that the startups founders tend to fall in love with the solution and that they try to build everything before testing and validating the real problem or market need. That's a key issue. We should solve this through more specialized mentoring to startups and founders. And I think that the clusters need to or can contribute to this. Also, clusters and networks have to enhance the level of support in order to deal with these issues. And I think that clusters are highly important because they are connectors that can connect the startups with corporates and with academia, with research institutions and public stakeholders. So one of the issues of the startup and the barriers themselves is the lack of contacts and connections. So if we access through these networks via the clusters, for example, and also develop open innovation programs where startups can develop their solution with research organization or also with corporates to try them on a more more advanced stage. And that would be important. I think that the clusters have a say into this, and pilot testings also is important. And I think that clusters also need to become a third generation of clusters and to move forward and enhance these capabilities.
Thank you. Stami, to come back to you, there's quite a lot to unpack there from the conversation. Give me your thoughts on barriers, on the cluster solution, and then we'll come around to funding questions for all of you, as well as what clusters themselves need for another round before we wrap up.
I think I have to highlight the fact that clusters are actually doing this. They are connecting the startups and the SMEs and the stakeholders to national policy, regional policy, and EU policy. So I have to take that as a fact and reassure everyone that clusters do what we are supposed to do. And we're doing it quite well, given all the limitations that we have to do. I think with startups, I think everybody has touched all the points. Yes, it's the lack of funding. Yes, it's the lack of mindset when it comes to the big VCs. In Europe, we'll never see a 200 million, fund give that kind of money to biotech to have the next drug discovery. I mean, unfortunately, that's the way it is, or that's the way it is at the moment. We don't know how things are going to change in the next 5 to 10 years. So I'm hopeful that we're going to see these big investments. I think it's a mentality as well. We need to actually, and it's sort of starting to change, we have to actually educate and train the entrepreneurs that it's okay to take a risk. We want to, in Europe, unfortunately, a failure, I think Johnny mentioned it, a failure is seen as a big thing and it's scared off, while in the US, the mentality is like, okay, you fail, you try again. I think that's why probably the response to the VC to Catalina was, let's take the safe road, do something that is, not very hard, not very complex, and let's see how it goes. But I think that needs to change. And it's up to the clusters to actually educate the innovators and the VCs, and this is something SEBRA does, to sit on the same table and realize that if you want to make, you have to take a risk in order to have the big discovery. In order for you, because ultimately VCs want to make money, and that's fine, that's their role. They have to take a risk and put money in the risky business, which potentially will give them a lot of return. And I think the public probably needs to be educated in as well, put pressure in the next innovative drug, the next innovative medtech or health tech device will benefit the public out there. So I think that we need to actually involve the patients, the citizens, in order to put pressure, not just to the regulators in order to make things smoother, or the EU Commission to make better strategies, but to the VCs in order to put taxation money and their own money into the game too. So I think we all on the same page. We all sort of deal with this and trying to find solutions every day.
Well, Stami, let me stay with you on this funding question, because I see a question has come in from an attendee asking whether would the private sector be more willing to co-invest at the seed A or B series funding if the EIB engaged in a matching program. So have you seen previous successes of these type of private-public sector partnerships in your area? And I'll put the same question to the others as well, but Stami first, please.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think the whole fact, for example, the EIC Accelerator, and I keep referring back to this is a tool that we have. When a startup has the stamp of approval from the EU Commission and the money that comes with it, that should actually unlock in a way or de-risk or minimize the risk for a VC. So private-public collaborations are the way to go. I mean, we've seen it in a smaller case in Greece. Again, we had a very traditional generic manufacturing big pharma, which now, with the help of the cluster, realizes that if they want to make the next big step, they have to actually invest into smaller, innovative projects. And in the last probably 3 years in Greece, we've seen big Greek traditional pharma putting money into a startup when we're talking about repurposing, for example, drug repurposing. So for Greece, it's a big success story. And we want to see a lot more of that. I think clusters play a very critical role in educating the big pharma industry. I'm talking again about life sciences, but the industry, the big industry in all sectors, that if they can utilize their involvement in clusters in order to cherry pick the next big thing. So it's to their benefit, and it's to their advantage to be involved in clusters and understand, see where the new technology goes, be agile in order to change their pipelines, because sometimes with big industry, being agile is not their best it's not the best hand. But having big, for example, in France, I think BPI France tries to bring investors and industry together with smaller innovative partners. So if we see more of these kind of actions, I think the money will come and we can actually help the startups become scale-ups and become the next unicorns and stay in Europe. That's the key. That's the key.
I mean, and the other element, of course, we haven't really talked about for today's point of view is that startups and scale-ups can also be instrumental in tackling big societal challenges through innovation, through things like food security, combating antimicrobial resistance, pandemic preparedness. All of these things, we're really relying on innovation to help us deal with these potential future threats as well in a societally coherent way. Yeah,
absolutely, Jennifer. And sorry to interrupt you, but small startups can actually unlock processes as well as processes when we're talking about big industry, when big industry has to change the way of thinking when we're talking about digital transition and green transition, utilizing new technologies or new ideas from startups can actually help their pipeline become more effective. So I think it's a win-win situation that we sort of clusters have the role on our shoulders to educate everyone, because we do have access to everyone. So that falls back to us, that we're doing it brilliantly and will continue to do.
I wholeheartedly agree. And that means that I have a very good question then for my wrap-up final question to each of you, which is, what is the support that the clusters themselves need in order to better serve their audience, which is the startups and scale-ups? Catalina, can I start with you to give us your takeaway thought on maybe it's funding, but what support do clusters need?
Funding. The support that we need is funding. We, as Tammy already said, we are the key of the fostering to the startups. The startups doesn't know where to begin to. They are coming to us, or we are seeking for them and trying to help them, because we have all the keys. We have the stakeholders that are our collaborators, so we know them. We can engage and make the commitment between the startups and the founders, and also for the mentoring part, because we as a cluster, we are doing a lot of mentoring part for the startups, because we are holding the key stakeholders into our startups, into our clusters. So programs for funding the clusters to foster acceleration programs and to support the startups for growing.
Thank you. Jose, I noticed you nodding along there, Catalina.
Yeah.
What is it that in your view clusters need?
Yeah, in my view, not all the clusters are in the same level, at the same level. So maybe we have here lots of example or brilliant clusters, but this is not the same in many regions across Europe. So I insist on capacity building programs for cluster managers, but also for the advisors within the clusters. And of course, a more long-term, stable and financial support could also help clusters to further in their strategies in order to implement a more stable support. And of course, I already mentioned before, collaboration across many other different networks. I'm working, I mentioned across the Enterprise Europe network. This is a network composed of working with startups, with SMEs, with innovative SMEs. So we all have the same target. So cooperation is also a key thing.
Thank you. Gisela, your plea for what you would need or what you would like to see clusters get more of in order to better serve those startups that we want to help with this strategy.
Yes, well, I will only have to agree with what has been said, because I think long-term funding for clusters is really needed. We have all the actors around us, so we are really key and the center of these connections, but we need to have the resources to put in reality all the ideas and all the things that we can do to connect these people and make the startups grow and make the corporates, for instance, be more digital or more innovative. But yeah, I think we just funded with the need to support and to be able to support our members.
And Stanley, then finally, the same question to you as a key takeaway.
Well, funding definitely, but funding for clusters to actually do capacity training for themselves as well, because as Jose said, and as what we have seen in our experience in our network, very different clusters have very different funding schemes from their own national authorities, or membership or driven only. They have very different capacities in the question of sizing, of team sizing. So I think I put in the chat of cluster training. I think that's a key one for everyone. I mean, clusters are doing a fantastic job, and we can do a lot more. And this is something that as CBER, I'm trying to educate and help our clusters become better at their job. Cluster managers, EU project managers, you know, teams, that they have to ultimately be educated and be better prepared in order to help our members grow to implement the strategy. So yes, we do want more funding, but we do more funding for clusters, not to educate, to execute more projects, but to be more targeted into how we do capacity training and how we are better at our jobs.
Of course, clusters themselves need to be efficient as well in getting the resources to the right places. Thank you all very much, and also for your comments in the chat. I know there's some really useful links there that you can look at. Thank you once again to all of our panelists for our discussion today. Speaking of funding, I'm going to turn the floor over now to Nina to tell us about the funding opportunities.
Many thanks, Jennifer, and thanks to all for the interesting discussion. Just to close with some calls that might be of interest to you before we go on with our day. First of all, the Women Tech EU initiative is looking for a consortium to support early-stage women-led deep tech startups to bridge the gender gap in the European innovation ecosystem. So the selected consortium should design and manage the program, launch at least 2 calls per year to select and fund eligible women-led startups, organize evaluation and award processes, as well as build a network through the initiative. The deadline is the 2nd of September. You find the topic ID here on the screen and the link in the chat. And there's a call that is called Expanding Investment Ecosystems, of course, something that we talked about today as well. The objective is to strengthen the integration of less connected innovation ecosystems with stronger EU business hubs by creating access to foreign venture capital, supporting startup internationalization, and improving the flow of investments and knowledge across Europe. So the expected impact, as you can see here, is more foreign VC investments in underfunded EU regions, improved investor awareness of local startup opportunities, as well as better startup understanding of market expectations in leading EU regions. And the deadline will be the 20th of January next year. The call will open at the beginning of September, and it is published already on the funding and tenders portal. Another call is scaling up deep tech ecosystems. As you can see here, the aim of the call is to leverage pan-European research infrastructures as anchors for deep tech innovation, enhancing collaboration with industry and SMEs, and maximizing the market and social impact of previous investments. The different series of actions and impact that is expected. So we are looking, of course, into the identification of what are the deep tech innovations with strong potential, but also looking at their axis of feasibility, scalability, and readiness, something we talked about in the discussion today. Select which one have the highest market and social impact, and design calls for pilot projects in 3 to 5 technology areas, and manage that, of course. Same period, more or less, than the previous call, so it will open the 10th of September and close on the 20th of January. In case anything of those are interested, the link's on the chat so that you can have a closer look at these calls. Thanks, and back to you, Jennifer.
Thank you very much, Nina, for going through those. Lastly, register for the next talks. There's just one before the summer break. That's next week, next Wednesday, and it's on driving competitiveness with the single market strategy. Please also continue the discussion online. You can go to the LinkedIn page, which is the European Cluster Collaboration Platform General Discussion Group, and the link is there in the chat for you as well. You can also engage in all the social medias in addition to checking out the clustercollaboration.eu website. You can find them on LinkedIn, you can find on Facebook, and of course on X or Twitter. And if you want to share anywhere else, just use the hashtag EU Clusters Talks or ECCP to make sure every one of the attendees can find you. That's it for today. Thank you all so much for your attention and for joining us, and have a lovely day. See you next time.